Hi, this is Judy Dans and welcome to my workroom. And today's video is all about the die, and that's all we're showing you today is about the die. The rag die is a fairly new addition to my workroom, and it's one that people seem to have a lot of questions about. So I thought I'd do a short video to show you what I've learned about the rag die. Now I am in the process of cutting out my second quilt with this die, so I've got some pretty good cutting time with it. And the first thing to note about this die is that there are a lot of blades, and it's very easy to cut yourself. I got my knuckles the first couple times by just resting them on the foam, and you want to be sure to keep your hands, fingers, and especially knuckles completely away from the die. Now with my die, I have outlined the outer edge of the die with a Sharpie so that I know where to line my fabric up. The other thing you might notice that this die's got a lot of threads poking out, and I've actually cleaned this die. The first thing that happens, people will get this die, they'll do one cut of like flannel, and they'll have stray threads all over the place, and they'll take 15-20 minutes to get those threads out before they cut another run of flannel. And of course with the rag quilts, that's going to take way too much time to do that. So the first thing to know about this die is you don't need to clean stray threads out of the die every time you use the die. You only need to do that. I only do it at the end of a project. And actually, I'm on my second quilt and I just kind of clean the threads out. I haven't cleaned them once since I started the quilt. It does not seem to impact the use of the die, doesn't seem to impact how well it functions. It just works. Now, the instructions recommend cutting, in my case I'm doing flannel, and cutting flannel strips into 9.5 inch strips. The die will cut an 8.5 inch square with a 6 inch or 6.5 inch finished square inside. And all these little knives around the outer edge is what gives you your fringe that frays out to make a wonderful rag quilt. So I have cut mine. Now because I have marked my die, I have cut my strips into 9 inch instead of 9.5 because I can clearly see where on my die to place my fabric. So notice that the die is already cattywampus because it's a very full die on the Go cutter, so you don't have the ability to really feed it in at an angle. You're going to feed it straight. So I'm going to lay my strip. Now I only do 2 layers at a time with this because I have very heavy flannel. This flannel is a good quality flannel that is quilt shop quality, and 2 layers is about all I can hand crank. It gets really hard on flannel, especially when you start getting too many layers. Now this does take the, you do need a mat the size of the die. And notice I have a well-used mat. One of the things I've kind of noticed with this die is most of the wear and tear on a mat is along the outer edges. So if you have a square mat that you've used on another die that maybe has mostly cut in the center, like hearts, stars, or in this case it was a value die, that's a good mat to use on this process. I have done probably about 100 to 120 cuts with this so far just to get the one quilt. And I'm halfway into my second quilt, and I just wore out the first mat. And it was a very well used mat before I started. So because there are a lot of blades with this die, you are going to wear your mats out, and found that this is a good time to start wearing out those mats you've already got some use out of. So I'm going to put my 2 layers of flannel. Now notice I have my flannel wrong sides together. Same flannel going through, because when I get through and cut, I'm going to have my 2 pieces all ready. All I have to do when I get ready to sew them is to put my piece of batting in, and I'm ready to go. So I feed them in the same pairs that they're going to end up being in the quilt. So I have my 2 pieces of fabric. I put my mat on. Now this mat, because I've marked where the edges of the die is going to cut, I can move. I have some area to move this mat around. Now here is what's so hard and kind of freaks some people out, that this thing is hard to turn. especially with this better quality flannel. Now, it would be wonderful to cut more layers of flannel. I have access to a studio die, and the studios definitely cut more. Not only more layers, but they have more blocks in the die. But for my little go here, I just do 2 layers. Now I'm going to pull my thing out and take my mat off. And in this particular case, it did a great job, and it cut it out. Occasionally with this particular die, you will have threads that won't cut, and when that happens, that's why there's scissors. You just get your scissors out, you cut the couple stray threads, and presto, you're done. And now I'm ready to add this to a stack and ready to sew into my quilt. Now I'm going to talk just a few minutes about cleaning, because this die does create a lot of threads, and while this little pick works to get those little threads out, this little pick does not work to clean the rag die. It takes forever. A quick way to clean this die, especially the more you use it, you'll start getting some bigger threads. And remember, these blades, there's a lot of exposed blades here. It's really easy for me to want to touch these with my fingers. You'll cut yourself. So with this die in particular, be very cautious of those blades. I have a pair of needle nose pliers, and they have the rough edges inside. They're not slick. They got roughed edges so that they will grab a hold of the stray threads, and you can just pull them out. Now I can see after you've used this die, actually after you use the die just a few cuts, you'll be able to see where the blades for the fringe is at. You just go up in between the 2 blades and grab a hold and pull. And I have found this to be a very quick, look at that, just a very quick and effective way to clean this die. Now you want to pay attention to what you're doing. You don't want to grab the foam. But if you go in at a side, see how my hand is literally away from the blades in the center where there's no blades. I go in, grab, and pull out. Then you're not going to have any problem cleaning these. And so even if you wanted to, even the ones that are stuck down in there, so you could stop and clean these blades a little more often, because with these needle nose pliers, it just makes it a piece of cake. I don't really have anything else to say about the die at this point. I hope you get some use out of the video. It's great. My arthritic hand certainly is not cutting fringe anymore these days, and this die has been a godsend. And I had tons of scrap flannel that was just going nowhere, and now we'll be going into some scrap quilts for the living room. Thank you.